This is the paradox holding you back. It's called Solomon's paradox. And when I first heard about this for the first time, it just completely shook me to how severe and just widespread this paradox is. So Solomon's paradox is basically this phenomenon where people tend to be better at giving advice rather than taking advice. And basically Solomon's paradox was named after this historical figure, King Solomon, who was a really famous guy for his wisdom. He was a very wise guy. Everyone came up to him for advice and he would give really good advice. But his own personal life was in shambles. It was horrible. He just didn't have great relationships, has struggled with many things, and it almost seemed like he wasn't actually good at taking the advice for himself. And so when people talk about Solomon's paradox, basically they kind of refer to the situation or the person who is really great at giving other people advice, but really bad at taking in sometimes their own advice. And I've realized that this paradox just happens so much in my own life. Like when I think about advice that I just gave to a friend, I basically told him, hey, just have the uncomfortable conversation, kind of just conquer your fears, have the uncomfortable conversation, and it'll be much better once you're done with it. Like it's kind of like a band-aid that you rip off. As soon as you rip it off, you'll be glad that you've done that. And even though I gave this piece of advice, because I know deep down that's true, I know deep down that would actually be beneficial for him. When it comes to my own life, when it comes to the exact same piece of advice, having that uncomfortable conversation, like talking to a girl about how the relationship is going, talking to your boss asking for a raise, or talking to your parents about not wanting to continue with university, even though all these things involve uncomfortable conversations, and I know the advice of the importance of having these uncomfortable conversations, I still sometimes can't bring myself to do it. And so there's a massive difference between actually knowing what the advice is and actually being able to implement it. Because just knowing the advice, like have an uncomfortable conversation, or sleep more, or study more effectively, cool, it's great that you know this, but if you don't actually implement it in your own life, basically it's like a waste of thought. And I realized for me, thinking of these pieces of advice almost just became like a mental masturbation activity, where I was like, yeah, I'm being productive because I know all these pieces of advice. I'm so good at giving people advice. But I realized that if I don't actually implement anything that I've said, then that's just going to gradually ruin my life. And it happened in many cases. In many cases, things that could have just taken an uncomfortable conversation and finished up in a week ended up dragging for months, if not years. For example, my conversation with my parents about the gap year, I just never brought it up to them, so they kind of just found out by surprise, and because of that, we ended up in many arguments from that. And it was only recently did we resolve it. Everything's okay now, because now I've communicated it clearly. But that entire experience just felt like slowly ripping off a band-aid rather than just ripping it off at once. And this is just one piece of advice. I'm sure right now you can probably think of other pieces of advice that you probably give to your friends, but you don't actually action yourself. And so the message I kind of want to leave you with is really make sure you don't fall for Solomon's paradox. Make sure you don't secretly ruin your life by not following the advice that you give out to others.